In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I install double sliding doors on a greenhouse, high tunnel, or hoop house. The double sliding door I'm installing today is the exact type you'd receive if you purchased a double sliding door with one of our Tunnel Vision Hoops DIY kits. Now, if you have a double sliding door from somewhere else, that's okay, as many of the double sliding door types and models have very similar steps. So even if you're trying to install a different double sliding door, this video may help you a lot. There are three main reasons we offer these double sliding doors as an option with our Tunnel Vision Hoops high tunnel kits, and those three reasons are: one, it is an interior mounted double sliding door, which means when it's sliding to the left and the right, it's on the inside of the structure and won't hit snow or mud or anything else that's on the outside. This makes it easier to open all times of the year. Number two, it is made out of welded aluminum and inset 8mm twin wall polycarbonate, so it's beautiful, and it isn't simply just thrown together with L brackets and a little bit of polycarbonate, which could break down over time. And number three, it's relatively easy to install. So with that said, let's get into the installation process for this double sliding door. As with any install, we'll need to know what tools are required. So I'll do this next part real quick. Be sure to pause the video if you want to spend more time looking at the tools required, but here's a list of the tools you'll need for this installation. The first thing any door needs is the correct framing. If you bought this door with one of our Tunnel Vision Hoops DIY kits, check your custom end wall drawings that we provide, and the rough openings will be listed directly on those drawings. End wall drawings are just one of the things we like to provide to help make the installation of your package a little more simple. You can, of course, however, reference the instructions provided by the door manufacturer. Check the small hardware box that comes with the door, and there should be a paper set of instructions right there. In our specific case, our door rough opening is 93 inches wide by 83 inches tall. So there are two main things we'll need to frame out for this door. One, we'll need the rough opening, and secondly, just above the rough opening, we'll need the additional framing for our aluminum door track to mount to. The aluminum door track is ultimately what your sliding door will slide through and on, and all sliding doors need framing to mount this door track to. This additional framing for the door track to mount to will look a little odd possibly, because it literally looks like a second header with just a small gap above your rough opening header. You'll need that piece, and then you'll need additional horizontal framing to the left and the right of where your doors are initially installed so that the doors can slide to the left or the right. The first important thing we need to talk about with regards to the rough opening are L brackets and where to place them. We'll start at the threshold and then we'll talk about the header. If you're able to install the L brackets for your threshold steel so that the L brackets face down, that would be ideal in order to save some time on later steps. Putting your L brackets on the underside of the threshold is the best way to ensure that you have the space required to install your bottommost door brushes as well as the sliding door blocks at a later step. Setting your threshold up so the L brackets face down towards the earth will require you to dig out a little bit on the left and the right so that you can fit a drill driver beneath your threshold and have space to screw into the stud. This will be more difficult than putting the L brackets so they face up, but you'll likely be happy you did this at a later step. For us, on the framing of this door, I unfortunately had to have the L brackets facing up for a number of reasons, so we're going to deal with that through this installation, and I'll just point out when the steps would differ a little bit when your L brackets are facing up versus down. If you do need to install the L brackets to your threshold so the L brackets face up towards the sky, I recommend having the L brackets as close to the outer face of your threshold and framing as possible. This is because you're going to have space for a black sliding block, which is installed in a later step, and it will require some slight adjustment, but I'll show you how to do that later. For your rough opening header, those L brackets that hold those to the studs have to fall in the rough opening space because there won't be enough space between your rough opening door header and the door header that your track will mount to for the L brackets. So the L brackets have to be within the rough opening. I also recommend that those are pushed to the outermost edge of the rough opening because that will leave space for the door brushes that are installed at a later step. Once you know where on your threshold and your door header you need to put your L brackets, it's time to attach them. I like to get my threshold unit installed first and use a level when you're installing it. Attach the L brackets using 2 self-tapping screws on each face of each L bracket. After my door's threshold has been installed with L brackets on its left and right, then I measure up on the left and the right, make marks with marker, and install my header next. I always use clamps when I'm putting on the door header. Using one of the marks I made on the studs, I apply a clamp so that my header can rest on top of that clamp. It's like an extra pair of hands. And then I go to the other side and make sure the bottom of my header is lined up with the other mark I made on the stud. I use another clamp, I use a level, I make any adjustments I need, then I drive 2 tack screws through the L bracket and into the stud on this end of my header. After that, I go to the other end of the header that's just sitting on my clamp. I make any additional adjustments, I line it up again, I double check my level and my measurement for the height of my rough opening, and I pin it in with 2 Tech screws through its L bracket. Once I have my rough opening threshold and door header in place, it's time for me to install the second door header, the header that the aluminum door track will ultimately be installed to. For the door we're installing, there will be a 1-inch gap between the top of the rough opening door header and the bottom of the aluminum door track header. So I'm going to leave a 1-inch gap there. For this horizontal member, the L brackets have to face up. Typically, I would use a clamp on the left and the right to hold this header in place, but the door studs are spaced so perfectly that I have a snug fit here, and I'm able to just attach the L brackets with 2 self-tapping screws in each L bracket without using clamps. After you install the topmost header, which your aluminum door track will mount to, you'll need to install 2 additional pieces of horizontal square tube framing. These additional pieces of framing will be on the left and the right of your rough opening and will need to line up perfectly with the topmost header you just installed that your aluminum door track will attach to. Usually I can just line these up with the topmost header I installed, and I can do so by eye. You could also put a square up there and make a line if you needed that. These are installed very similarly by attaching L brackets to each of their ends and driving 2 self-tapping Tech screws through each face of that L bracket and into the studs behind them. Clamps can be used to hold the L brackets to the studs, but you can also use a clamp as a little ledge for the horizontal member to sit on, like I do here. Now that all of the pieces that make up the aluminum door track header have been installed, it's time for us to go open our door box. One of the first things to do is to locate the smaller door hardware box that is located within the larger double sliding door box, because inside are the manufacturer's included written instructions, which I often reference. Additionally, this box has all of the hardware you'll need to install your double sliding door. I like to safely and neatly lay out all of the hardware items I'll use in the future, that way I can keep track of them and not knock them into the mud or something. Packaged next to the door is the aluminum door track. Mounting this door track will be the next thing we focus on. For double sliding doors, there will typically be 2 pieces of door track to mount. One piece that allows your door to slide to the left, and one piece to allow your door to slide to the right. Because there are 2 pieces of track, this means they will meet and line up in the middle of our topmost door header. In order to make sure they're both installed evenly, we're going to measure for center and make a mark with a permanent marker on our top header. This will be where both pieces meet. I start with one piece of the aluminum door track. I line its one edge up with the center mark I made with the permanent marker here. Then I use clamps to hold it in place so its topmost edge is even with the topmost edge of the header we're attaching it to. Once in place, I use the provided hex head screws to attach it to the track mount framing. For this 8-foot piece of track, I use 5 evenly spaced screws, making sure there is 1 screw just about an inch or 2 from each of the track's ends. Next, I take the second piece of door track and line it up perfectly with the first. Again, I use 2 clamps to attach the door track to the square steel tubing behind it, making sure the topmost edge of the door track lines up with the topmost edge of the square steel tubing. Once I like how I've placed it, attach this piece of door track to the horizontal framing with the provided hex head Tech screws, similarly to the first piece of door track you installed. Now that the track is installed, we can get our doors ready to slide. To do that, we'll have to mount door rollers to the top of our doors. I get my door ready on a flat surface where the inside of the door is facing the sky, and for the doors we're installing in this video, there are 2 rollers per door, one closer to the left and one closer to the right. To place the first one, I measure in from the top edge 6 inches, and I make a mark. I continue the mark downward so I'll be able to see it through the center of the door roller hardware, and repeat on the other side. It is important to have the roller hardware's edge flush with the exterior facing edge of your door, and you want to be sure you're putting this mounting hardware on so the protruding plastic parts will end up on the inside of the structure. For us, this means we want these facing upward toward the sky when we're attaching these to the top of our door. Once in place, as described, use the provided panhead screws in available holes to attach the roller mount hardware. Repeat this process on the other location for the door, driving the required screws, and remember to have the plastic parts facing the right direction. Once the roller mounts are in place, the actual door rollers can be pushed into them. Usually they can pop right in, however, the black and white plastic tabs can be manipulated to help make it easier. The black tab releases the roller when pushed all the way to the right, and the white tab is the lock at the left position. Make sure you repeat the process for attaching your roller mount hardware to the tops of both of your doors, and then proceed to the next step. This next part is very important. First, I slide one of the doors into the door track. Before doing this, make sure that the door you're sliding on has the appropriate side facing out. Next, before I slide on the other half of my double sliding door, I'm going to locate the door stop blocks. These are black blocks that I'm going to have to use at this step. I take 2 of these black blocks and I launch them into the track before I put on that second door. This is what the door stop blocks look like after they've been slid into the track. And as you can see, they have a hole in their center where they can be secured to the underside of the track using a provided tech screw. Now, I usually just put these in at this point. We'll screw them in at a later step. These are very important to slide into your track before you put on the second door, because you won't be able to slide them on at a later step unless you remove one of the doors. And also because in the future, these are what will prevent one of your doors from sliding past the halfway point and smashing into the other door. And after these are in place, next I'm going to slide the second sliding door into the track to get it roughly into place. At this point, I like to get both of these doors centered to look at how well or poorly they meet in their middle. These doors, for example, meet at the top well, but then there's a very small gap where they meet at the bottom. And I don't like that. And I'm going to fix it before moving on, and I'm going to show you exactly how I fix it. The way we can adjust the doors so that they meet better in the middle is by this little wrench that the manufacturer sends with the hardware. This wrench can be used on the nut of the door rollers to either raise or lower one side of the door. For us, we're going to raise the left and right door to get rid of that small gap we had at the bottom exterior of the doors where they meet. After some adjustments, here's what the doors look like now. As you can see, that's a much tighter fit, and it looks that way all the way down to the bottom of the doors where they meet. That 1/4 inch gap is nowhere to be seen. Now it's time to move on to the stay roller. Now, depending on your door model, stay rollers might look like these, or they might look a little bit different, but essentially they all do the same thing. What stay rollers do is they help keep the door a consistent distance from your stud or your framing as it slides. These are also one of the main hardware components that prevent your door from blowing inward during strong winds. My goal here when installing the stay rollers is to make sure, number 1, that the door won't hit any metal of the stay roller, and 2, that the roller will make good contact with the interior face of the door. Once I've placed the stay roller in a location I'd like, I will mark the top hole with a marker and clamp the stay roller bracket in place. I then temporarily remove the roller so there's more space to drive the screws. Remember the order that you remove the roller, spacer, nut, and washer so that you can reassemble them after installing the stay roller bracket. I then pre-drill just the top screw hole location and drive the corresponding provided screw. I focus on this top screw first so that the bracket will be less likely to move around during the installation of the other 2 screws. After I've done this, I pre-drill the other 2 holes. Be careful with these 2 because depending on the structure you have, there may be a ground post inside of your stud, which will make that drill bit want to walk on you as you use it. So you might have to complete the pre-drilling for the bottom 2 screw holes a bit more slowly and possibly even slightly angle the drill bit to hit the ground post behind it. Once all 3 of the screws for your stay roller bracket are in place, now you can reassemble the stay roller and get it roughed in. Basically, I aim for about a 1/2 inch gap between the rough opening framing and the sliding door. This can always be adjusted and changed later. Since there is 1 stay roller per door, I repeat this process for the other stay roller. Next, I like to put in the blocks shown here. These are black sliding blocks. These go at the left and the right on the bottom exterior of the doors, and what these black sliding blocks do is they keep the doors from smacking into the framing and keep the door a consistent distance from the studs from the door's top all the way down to the door's bottom. I'm going to focus on these black sliding blocks now because my L brackets on my threshold are facing up, and therefore the order of operations that I'm going to follow are a little bit different. If my L brackets were facing down towards the earth on my threshold, I would actually put on my second threshold unit, which is shown near the end of this video, place my bottommost door brushes, and then, based on the location of those bottommost door brushes, then I would put my black sliding blocks in place. And better yet, I wouldn't even have to alter those sliding blocks. They would fit perfectly without being changed. This is a good example of how putting the L brackets facing down on your threshold can save you a lot of time and effort. But because my L brackets are facing up, I already mentioned I need to alter the blocks. It will also change where I put the brush, and for that reason, I'm going to show you how I alter those blocks right now. I rough the block in where I want it, make a mark on the block so I can see it, clamp it down to my workbench, and then I use a Sawzall to narrow this block down to size. Now this block fits perfectly, so I get it set and use a 1/8 inch drill bit to pre-drill a hole, and then I attach permanently with the provided Phillips drive screw that will sit flush once installed. I was having some problems while screwing this block in, so I just temporarily took the block off, drove the screw in, backed it back off, put my block back into place, and then drove the screw so it would permanently be installed. What this allowed me to do is simply drive the screw with a little less in the way. I repeat this process for the other side of my sliding door where the other block needs to be. And as you can see, at this point our double sliding door moves nice and easy and is honestly pretty close to complete. Now it is time to return to the blocks I tossed into the door track at an earlier step. Now that everything is set, it's time to fasten those blocks with screws. To get the block set, I like to get the doors squared up where there's an equal amount of framing visible on its left from the interior of the structure and on its right from the interior of the structure. Then I make sure the blocks are just touching the inside edge of my door rollers. I make a mark with a marker. Here's how I place these blocks on the marks I just made, and then using the manufacturer provided 5/16 inch drive hex head screws, I drive a screw through the hole on one block first and repeat the process on the other. This is what it will look like when they're screwed in. As you see, the end of the screw does push up through the top of the track, so please be careful if you ever reach your hand up there or anything like that. And now it's time to put these blocks to the test. As you can see, the door slides fine and stops right where it hits that rubber block. Once the door stop blocks have been installed that prevent the doors from sliding past the middle mark, we're going to move on to the door lock and the handles. There are two other door stop blocks that get put into the channel on the outside of each of the doors, but we're going to wait until the door lock and the handles are installed so we can make sure we put those exactly where we want them. The door lock is the most difficult and scary part of this installation in my opinion, and this is because it requires you to actually drill a hole through your beautiful door. For that reason, and because sometimes manufacturers make small changes to things, I definitely recommend you check the manufacturer's written instructions to get the exact location and hole diameter that you need for your door lock. For us, at the time of making this video, the hole I have to make is 1 1/4 inch in from the edge of the door and 7/16 of an inch in diameter. To ensure the hole is made straight, I use a square to get to the other side of the door, and I make another mark that way. Note that I am marking on this beautiful door with pencil and not marker, since it is easily erasable, and I do think these doors are quite beautiful without marker all over them. After I make the marks where the holes are going to be, I then take one more look, eyeing up my handle to make sure none of it will protrude past the edge of the door, and once pleased, even though the hole must be larger, I pre-drill the location with a 1/8 inch drill bit. I find that starting with a smaller drill bit really helps me make a more accurate and straight, larger hole. An important note here is that I don't drill all the way through the door. I actually take the 1/8 inch drill bit, go to the inside of the door, and drill another hole right on the mark I made. This will drastically improve the accuracy of this hole as I make it larger. After I get a 1/8 inch hole, I really like to use a step bit to enlarge the hole to nearly the correct diameter. The step bit allows me to slowly increase the size of that hole, and for that reason I highly recommend step bits. I repeat this process on both sides of the door until I have a 7/16 inch diameter hole. Then I go all the way through both of the holes with a 7/16 inch drill bit just to make sure I've cleaned everything out. Next, I try the latch stem to see if the holes are large enough. Looks like both of the holes could just be a hair larger, so this is where the step bit I referred to earlier comes in very handy. I'm going to use the step bit to drill just a little bit more into each hole, making that slightly larger and hopefully fitting the latch stem a lot better. I try the latch stem once more and it fits much better. I then extend my horizontal lines to make sure I install my door lock hardware square. I'll want to be able to see this line through both of the holes where I'm eventually supposed to put a screw. This will ensure that my lock set is installed square to the door. I then drive the first provided screw, leaving it a little loose just for a moment. You can see I even back up on this first screw a little bit so that the hardware has more freedom to move. This allows me to adjust the hardware slightly to make sure that the line I made previously is visible under the second hole before I drive the screw. Once I have it positioned, I drive the second screw into place and walk both of them in until fully seated, being careful not to over tighten. I give the handle some test turns to make sure that the latch stem can move freely in the hole I made. If it does not freely turn, carefully back out the screws you made, make the hole slightly larger on its inside and outside, and reattach, test it again, and then if it turns freely, you can proceed. It's time to put on the other half of the locking mechanism. This is called the black lever, and it faces the inside of the structure. Using an Allen wrench, I loosen this part here so that the black lever can fit over top of the latch stem. You're going to have to loosen this, and then when it's finally in place where you like it, you'll tighten it. You'll see me do this in a moment. It's time to put on the stainless steel Z-catch, which the black lever will hook onto when the door is in the closed and locked position. I'm going to slide the black lever onto the latch stem and rough it in place. I'm going to fold it downward into a horizontal position. When the black lever is in this horizontal position, it allows me to get the location where I have to put the stainless steel Z-catch. When I like the appearance of how the black lever sits in the Z-catch, I tighten up on this piece here with an Allen wrench so that it's set in place. For the stainless steel Z-catch, I use a pencil to mark where the provided screws will ultimately be driven through it and into the door. To drive these screws, I actually temporarily remove the stainless steel Z-catch and then drive the screws lightly where they're marked to create a punch/pilot hole location. I then put the catch back into place and drive the screws. Note that I wait to completely drive the screws in until both of the holes in both of the screws have been started. Once the screws have been driven all the way, it's time for a test. And bingo, this looks great. Now that that's complete and the door can lock shut, let's put on this odd-looking piece of hardware here. This is called an aluminum door stay, and this goes on the exterior of the door near its bottom. The aluminum door stay helps keep both of the doors in line at the bottom when they're in the closed position. Our aluminum door stay is going to be installed roughly where I'm holding it here. We want the angled portion of the door stay to be facing the exterior of the structure. We want some of the flat portion of the door stay to show, so we measure in 3/4 of an inch from the angled edge and make a mark on the door stay. If we line these marks up with the edge of the door, we'll have just enough flat door stay showing to provide a snug fit when the door closes shut. I use a clamp to hold the door stay where I want it, and then I drive the provided Tech screws through the holes in our door stay and into the door behind it. Sometimes I find that the aluminum gets gummed up in the screws, so I find it helps to pause, clean off the screw so that the aluminum isn't preventing me from driving the screw easily, and then I start up again and drive the screw all the way in. Note that there's about 1/4 inch of flat door stay extending past the door edge, which, as you can see here, makes for a nice snug fit when the door closes. It's now time to install our sliding door handles using the provided self-tapping Tech screws. We're going to install one per door on the inside and one per door on the outside of the structure. I like to start with the handle directly above the lock set we installed. Going by eye, I like to place this handle about 5 inches above the lock set, and I push it so it's flush against the window's aluminum trim as shown here. Once I have the handle where I like it, I carefully drive the provided Tech screws. Next, I use a pencil and a straight member to line up my second exterior handle location. I also make sure this handle is pushed against the door's aluminum window trim, which ensures that it's installed square as well. After both of these exterior handles have been installed, I use a square and a pencil to determine where to install the handles on the interior of the doors. Just like before, once the handle is lined up, I drive the provided screws. I repeat this process for both interior handles, and please note that this last handle that I'm doing here may not rest flat on the door, but will instead rest partially on the astragal of the door and partially on the door itself. Now that the handles are installed, it's time for us to install our outermost door stop blocks. They go on the outside to prevent the doors from sliding off the tracks. But the doors won't slide off the tracks because they got these handles. So really, we got to put these on because they will prevent the door from slamming into the door framing, which isn't great when you spend money on a super cool door like this. So to prevent this, it says about 3.5 inches, so that's where we'll do it. And then I make my way to the inside and go to the end of the sliding door track. I'm going to make a mark inside of the door track right where my door roller ends. And then I'm going to insert a door stop block into the end of the track. Once the door stop block is lined up with the mark I made, I'm going to drive a provided 5/16 inch drive Tech screw up through the block and into the top of the track. As you can see, this will prevent the door from opening any further, which will prevent the door handles on the exterior of the structure from smashing into the studs when the door is opened. Repeat this process for the other door so that there's a stop block in the track for that door as well. Next, we're going to close off the air gaps on the sides and top of our door by installing brushes. These brushes do a decent job of cutting down air movement while also still allowing the door to slide. We're going to start with our side brushes. They're longer than required, so we're going to measure for the length we need and make a cut on this piece. We're going to measure from the top of our black sliding block all the way up to the underside of our door header. Once we have a measurement, I mark where to cut, and using a hacksaw or a reciprocating saw, I carefully cut the brush. Since cutting the brush opens up the brush track, I make sure to crimp the end of the brush track to lock the brush in place. If you don't do this, the brush can actually slide out of this track, so make sure you crimp it. I then position the brush against the door and attach it through the lip using the provided self-tapping tech screws. Take note of how this door brush can fit directly next to the L bracket we installed earlier for our door header. This is the reason why our L bracket has been pushed to the outer face of the header and not centered on the header. We were anticipating that we need to put these brushes on, and because we've done this, we can install this door brush without manipulating this brush at all. I repeat the process on the other side brush, measuring, cutting, crimping, fitting, and attaching it to the rough opening. I then give the doors a test to make sure I have the pressure right and don't need to adjust the brushes, and after both side brushes seem good, I repeat this process for my header brush. Once trimmed to length, I use the provided tech screws to attach the top brush to the header to eliminate the top gap. I like to get one easy screw in and then just work from one of the ends to the other. Here are what these three brushes look like once installed. We have the side brush on the left, we have the top brush on the header, and we have the side brush on the right. Our final door brushes get attached to the bottom of each door, and because our doors are currently floating over the ground, we need to add a second threshold unit to the interior face of the rough opening threshold so that our bottom door brushes have something to brush against, thus creating a better seal. Please note that this second threshold unit is optional for some projects, and some people prefer to just add crushed stone or gravel for their doors to slide over, and that's fine too. For us and this door here, we're going to make a double wide threshold, and we're going to do it right now. If you have one of our DIY kits that has this second threshold, locate the unit that has the pre-drilled holes in one of its faces. Make sure both doors are in the open position, and then line this threshold unit up against the interior face of your rough opening threshold. We want to be able to see the holes of this unit from the inside. We'll make sure that this piece is centered and doesn't make contact with the very bottom of our door on its left and right, and then we use clamps to hold the two threshold pieces together. I like to use 3 clamps for this when I have the opportunity. Then, using an extender bit and a hex head driver and provided tech screws, drive the screws through the joining faces of these tubes. Drive 1 screw per location, making sure not to overdrive the screws. Next, as mentioned previously, if the L brackets on our threshold were facing down, the bottommost door brush on our doors would have been installed before we put on our black sliding blocks, and these brushes would have been put on the exterior face of the doors. Because our L brackets are facing up and we needed to manipulate the black sliding block, I find that in these scenarios, the bottommost brushes are most easily attached to the doors on the interior of the structure. Doing so only requires you to adjust the stay rollers on the left and the right so that you can fit the brush between the door and the stay roller. If you put the brush on the inside, it also allows you to maintain that 1/2 inch distance between the stud and the door on the exterior of the door. When I install the brushes on the interior of the door, I just like to make sure that the stay rollers make firm contact with a part of the brush that can roll easily as it's opening and closing, as shown here. Just like the other door brushes, the bottommost brush is installed using the provided self-tapping tech screws. Once the bottommost door brush is on and the double threshold is in place, one of the last things you need to do for your sliding door is install the cane bolt. The cane bolt is what will help keep one side of your door in the closed position and will act as one other form of defense in strong winds. It'll attach, as shown here, with self-driving screws, and then I like to drive a 1 3/8 inch tube right against the second threshold I installed so that the cane bolt can drop into that tube when it's in the locked position. When all is said and done and everything has been installed, I like to put crushed stone or gravel underneath the double threshold after installing so that there's extra support underneath these members for when people or machinery move over top of them. Also, keep in mind that these thresholds are being used because, well, there's nothing here but soil. There is no rule, however, that states you have to use metal as your threshold. Some people use concrete as the threshold for their door. Just something to keep in mind as you go through the planning process for your future high tunnel. If you liked the double sliding door or any of the greenhouses shown in this video, we manufacture those greenhouses and would love to work with you. You can visit us at tunnelvisionhoops.com or visit this QR code. Thanks for watching.